Good afternoon, everyone. It is 1 p.m. Eastern, and we are going to go ahead and get started with our webinar. Thank you so much to everyone for joining today. My name is Laurel Rodriguez, and I am the Director of Marketing at Share Impact. Our topic today is Rethink Strategic Planning for 2026, Build Your Impact Roadmap. Our speaker today is Sheri Chaney Jones, founder and president of Share Impact. Sheri is a social change entrepreneur, an expert in social impact measurement, and a thought leader in applied organizational research. She believes in data, metrics, and accountability. Sheri is also passionate about women's equity and advancement of girls. She is a past Columbus chapter president of the National Association of Women Business Owners and a commissioner for the Columbus Women's Commission for the Mayor's Office. Just a quick note before we start, your microphones will be muted, so feel free to enter any questions you may have in the chat. We will also be having a Q&A towards the end, and we'll be addressing them there. And with that, I will go ahead and turn the time over to Sheri.
Thank you, Laurel. It is so wonderful to be with you all today, whether you're out in, we've got people all the way from LA to Calgary, at least is what I've seen so far in the chat. But I would love, as you're joining, logging in, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. You never know who you may meet on this call that you want to connect with later because you have similar interests or missions, and you can learn and grow from each other. I also love to know, oh, wait, we've got someone from Nigeria. Wow, we've got all the way from Nigeria to LA. This is great. I absolutely love to, have you each other connect with each other, but I also love to change my content based on your mission. So if I see there's a lot of like Tracy here with senior services, if I see there's a lot of senior service organizations, I'll maybe throw some examples in there, or children's services, or whatever the different missions are. I like to try to weave those in. But it is so wonderful to see so many familiar names as well as new names as well. And welcome back to a Share Impact webinar. So as we get started, I want to take a poll. And Laurel, is this a chat poll, or will there actually be a poll that pops up?
This is a Zoom poll. Let me see
A
if I can
Zoom
launch that
poll.
right now.
Awesome. Well, I love data. So I want to know, oh, whoops. I don't know. I can't see the poll, but hopefully you can see the poll. And what we really want to understand is what describe, oh, here, great. I just see it. Which of these describe your strategic plan? So you could have a plan that includes outcome metrics aligned with your mission. That's a key distinguisher. And data are strategically being used.
Entraron uno,
Or we could
sí,
have, let's
ajá,
see,
un muchacho,
we got
luego una
some
señora
background
después.
noise there. Or we can have a plan that includes some metrics, but we're not consistently using them. We might have put them into our plan, but we don't really think about them or use them. You could have a plan that does not include metrics, or you could say, what strategic plan, Sheri? We don't even have one. So I was just curious to see where everyone fits in here when they think about their organization's strategic plan. So go ahead, put that in the chat. That data will help us understand kind of where everyone is today. So today what we're going to talk about is, as people are joining, finishing the poll, is we will be talking about a different take on strategic planning and really reframing what it means to have a strategic plan to an impact roadmap. And we'll talk about what that is, why it's important, how it's different than a traditional strategic plan. All right, great. Okay, we're doing a little bit good. You should see the results here on your screen. Looks like about half of you fall within the our plan includes some metrics, but they're not consistently used, or you have no metrics. So we are definitely in the right room. And those of you who are up in the 28% that have a outcomes metric aligned with our mission, and you're strategically using those data, that is almost identical to the research that we found that around 25% of the nonprofit sector falls in that category, that has outcomes aligned with their metrics and are using it to strategically make decisions part of their mission. So we are, you guys, we have a representation of the sector here today. This is great. All right, so let's get started. First, let's talk about the problems with this the traditional strategic planning process. So yes, I am now the CEO of a software company called Sure Impact, but prior to that, I had spent 20 some years as a organizational development and research consultant, working internally within government entities as well as externally with government entities. So although I haven't counted all of the strategic plans I've facilitated over the past 20 some years, I know it is definitely more than 100. Definitely more than 100 strategic plans that I have facilitated in my career. And I can pretty much at this point, although I don't do this work anymore, but if I did, I would walk in and I could guarantee you what a board is going to say. They're going to put some mission statement on the wall. And then when we start to get into tactics, I'm going to hear about marketing. I'm going to hear about communications. I'm going to hear about fundraising. I'm going to hear about finance. And I am going to hear almost nothing. And I'm dead serious about this. Almost nothing about the mission of the organization and how they're going to accomplish it. So think about your own strategic plan and think about if maybe that's true for you as well. So the old strategic plans that I've seen, they're static. A board got together at some point, they put something together on a piece of paper, and they typically are very outputs focused. And we'll talk about what outputs are versus outcomes. But for now, we'll just think about outputs are like counts of what you're going to do. Like, we did this, check. We did this, check. So we'll talk about why that's a problem. They typically really lack actionable steps, like what can I do tomorrow, or what can I do next month that's going to get us to achieve these goals that we've set. And so we want to make sure we're creating actionable steps towards our mission. And very, very often there is no, like, I mean, really, if you think about it, how often do you even share your strategic plan with your funders? Because most of them don't really resonate with funders because they don't talk about your why. They don't talk about your mission. They don't talk about the outcomes you are going to achieve with your participants and your communities, right? They're talking about your fundraising goals and your marketing goals and your operational goals. So because of that, you have missed opportunities for your impact storytelling. It really, what the old way does is it sends your staff down a path where they're chasing activities and outputs that aren't aligned with why you exist in the first place. So when it comes time to start talking about your impact and your storytelling, all of your staff are showing up talking about is their processes or their activities that really aren't aligning with your mission. And so we're going to talk about why we need to flip this on this head. But before I kind of give us the actionable step-by-step processes that we're going to talk about today, I want to make sure you understand the science. I'm a huge believer in data-driven decision-making. If you do my personality profile, you will learn that I am a very, very high fact finder as a leader. I need data and facts before I will act. And I imagine there's several of you on the call as well that are that way too. So for those of you on the call that need those data and facts before you act or change your behavior, let's make sure you have that data and facts. So I did some research back in 2012, 2013, as I was transitioning from running the Performance Center with the Ohio Department of Aging. And before that, I was the Deputy Director of Performance Evaluation with the Franklin County Domestic and Juvenile Courts. And in both of those roles, my job was to evaluate the impact of the grants that we gave out, as well as our own internal programs, package that all up to go lobby for more funding for our communities and tell our story larger in the community. And I knew that the work that we had done and how I had been able to help transform our cultures at those two organizations would be significant if more nonprofits adopted them. But at the time, I thought of myself as a bureaucrat and an industrial organizational psychologist. I didn't think of myself as all the things I think of myself as today: an author, a speaker, a trainer, and now a software CEO. And I needed to do the only thing I knew how to do well at the time, and that was to conduct a unfunded market research study. I'm sure that's what you all would do as well. But it was super exciting for me. I created what was called the Measurement Culture Survey. I sent it to over 200 nonprofits across the US and Canada. And what we were looking at was just similar, a much more robust study, but kind of like those questions I just asked you at the beginning of this meeting, was what data did nonprofits have? What kind of data did they have? And how are they strategically using it to make decisions? So that was one part of the survey. The other part of the survey was related to the results the organization had accomplished in the past 2 years. So looking at their results over the past 2 years. And the results that I found were so inspiring to me that I needed every nonprofit as possible to know this data. And 10 years later, I'm still sharing these results. But I did what you had to do back in 2013 if you wanted everyone to know about some research. I wrote a book. I wrote a book called Impact and Excellence. So this research was published in that book. But what we found was there's 3 types of organizations. So our high culture organizations were those, like we talked about at the beginning, that had measures aligned with their mission and were strategically using it to make decisions. So that was our high culture organizations. Our moderate culture organizations were those who maybe had metrics, but they were using them because some funder asked them to collect those, or it was very a compliance activity, but it wasn't used. It lived in someone's office somewhere, but it wasn't strategic as part of their organization. And then the third group were low culture organizations that had no data and were not using them to make decisions. So how you're going to interpret this graph, if you're looking at the screen, is that across the board, our high culture organizations, so the 28% of you who identified that you have metrics aligned with your mission and you're strategically using them, if I were to like recreate the study with everyone on the call, what we would find is that your organizations would be more likely than the others to achieve the following things: to have greater efficiencies, meaning you are achieving your mission at a more effective and efficient rate. You have better external relationships, so better relationships with your partners, your funders, the media, the press, policymakers. You also would likely have better internal relationships, so better cooperation, communication, and collaboration inside an organization, as well as, at least the research shows, you would have increased your revenue at a much significant rate than your peer organizations that fell in that moderate or low. So how to interpret this graph? 87% of our high culture organizations had increased efficiencies over the past 2 years. 37% of our moderate culture had increased efficiencies over the past years, and only 12% of our low culture had increased efficiencies over the last 12 years. So when we go look at increased revenue, look at that, 12% or 62% of our high culture organizations had increased revenue over the last 2 years. And why this research is, I almost stopped sharing this research at the end of last year because I'm like, it's 10 years old, it's time to retire it. And then the world changed, or at least the US funding landscape changed. And I felt like, wow, we're back to where we were in the time this research was done. So it's very, very relevant in the fact that even during the Great Recession, 62% of our high culture organizations had reported increased revenue in the past 2 years during that Great Recession versus 18% of moderate and 12% of low. So why this session is so important, and it's, you gave yourself a gift, your organization's a gift for showing up today, is because this is going to be your secret sauce over the next several years as we're dealing with the changes in the funding landscape. What is more important about this conversation, and I already gave you the headline at the beginning of this presentation, is that only 25% of the nonprofit sector fell in that high culture category. So that's why I wrote Impact and Excellence. That's why I have done everything I have done professionally in the past 10 years, is to change this statistic. And I wish it was higher. And maybe it is higher. It's just the people who are crushing it don't need to come to this particular webinar. Who knows? But our goal is to get 75% of the organizations in that high culture category, and the rest of the 25 working their way there. That would be my ultimate goal. When I start to see that in the sector, it means I can retire. That is what we're working towards. That is what we're trying to change. We want to empower you, equip you, inspire you, give you the tools, give you the resources you need to become one of those high culture categories that is fully funded, sustainable, driving your mission, changing lives, changing circumstances, and known for excellence. And why I can stand here with confidence and tell you that I know every single person on this call in their organization can create those cultures within their organization is because the research showed that there was no correlation between the size of an organization, their budget, and their ability to create these high performing cultures. So if you have it in your head that, oh, I'd love to, Sheri, but we can't afford it, or we don't have enough staff, or we don't have enough time, or we don't have enough expertise, those are just myths, because our research showed that the one deciding factor, the one thing that made a difference, whether they would become high performing or not, was the commitment and willingness of the leaders, because it does not take a lot of money. It does take time, but it's the time you should be doing anyway, but it doesn't take a lot of money, and we can train you on how to do it. And with Sure Impact, we've developed technology to help automate it. So you don't even have to think about the how if you don't know. So let's talk about why we want to reframe our strategic plans and focus on an impact roadmap instead, and what that is. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that we have a purpose-driven mission statement. Now, most nonprofits have this pretty well fleshed out, but we'll give you an example of where what is a good impact mission statement and what is not, and you can reevaluate your own and make sure that you're starting with a very purpose-driven mission statement. Then we're going to make sure that we identify vehicles for achieving that mission statement. Now think about the work that you're doing in your impact, your current strategic plan. Are you focused on the change that you want to see in your communities, the change in the participants that you want to see? And are you aligning your activities and what you're doing there? Or are you really thinking more operational, and there's a strong disconnect between the work that you do every single day and what's showing up in your strategic plan, because that is often what we see. And then the third thing is you need to make sure you have the success metrics that are aligned to that mission, that are driving those key focus areas. So when your team comes together, their effort is towards what you want to accomplish and not towards some other things, or at least they understand how this activity that they're doing today is going to drive that mission forward. And I don't mean drive more revenue to your organization, because that's a given. You need money to do the work that you do. It's about changing the lives and changing the circumstances. So why in 2026 should you think about an impact roadmap instead of your traditional strategic plan? Well, I already showed you it. It's because if you put these things in practice, research shows that you are going to be part of that group that isn't going to increase funding right now when the funding cycles are crazy. But you can do it. You can overcome the challenges and get there. Why I want you to do this and why I want the sector to do it is because we are here to change lives and change circumstances. And we cannot manage what we don't measure. So if we don't know how our nonprofits are changing lives and changing circumstances and what way they're doing it, then there is no way that we can improve those outcomes. We can't, because we don't even know where we're starting from. It also, once you have that data, it helps you strengthen your impact story, which is why you're able to increase funding, because you will inspire more donors, more people will feel resonated with your mission, and they will trust that if they donate to you, you will be a good bet for them. You also can't talk about your social return on investment if you aren't collecting your outcomes and you're not able to prove how you're changing lives and changing circumstances. So if you want to go after those coveted dollars that are out there, people want to see that social return on investment. If they give you X amount of dollars, how does that translate into whether it's increased community benefit or decreased community costs? But you can't do that without measuring outcomes. Also, it helps establish your industry leadership. That is why I love doing what we do, is that we know that organizations who use Sure Impact, all of them can be industry leaders, because at any given time, if Forbes called them, if the New York Times called them, if the Washington Post called them, if Chronicles of Philanthropy called them, if anyone called them and said, hey, I want to learn about your impact, all they have to do is click a button and there they have it. They could share it with that press, or they could share it with that policymaker. And I'm going to tell a story later today about how one of our clients implemented what I'm sharing today and now has the $2 million line item in the state budget to help them expand and grow their work. So let's get started. What's the first thing we need to do? We talked about creating a purposeful mission statement. Now, I am a big believer, if you've attended my webinars in the past, I'm a big believer in giving you actionable step-by-step tools on how to accomplish this. So this is your gift today, this 5 whys exercise. It is such a simple exercise. I feel like a broken record because anytime I speak anywhere, I'm going to talk about the 5 whys exercise. But if we want to think about creating a purpose-driven mission statement, if we want to think about what should we measure, if we want to think about developing a logic model that aligns our activities to our outcomes, it all starts with this clarity. So what we want to do is, this is my 5 years exercise, and this is your homework. If you haven't done this recently, bring it back to a team meeting and have them all do it. So the first thing we're going to do is ask ourselves, why do we do what we do? And it's not you personally, but why does your organization do what it does? The next part of that is we're going to ask ourselves, why do our funders and partners want to partner with you? And the third question we're going to ask is, why do your participants and clients participate? What do they hope to accomplish? So we need to understand our organization's whys, our funders' whys, and our participants' whys. And if you think you know those whys, do the exercise anyway, because it is amazing how different these answers are often, even within a leadership team, the whys. So make sure you're doing this why, because you need this clarity. And I'll talk about how these whys become so important to developing your mission statement, so important to aligning your activities, and so important to measuring success. So, and why we need to do these 3 buckets is because often the whys are different. Your mission is typically there's a problem in the community and you want to solve it, or your founder had a passion and they wanted to solve it. And so that's why you exist. Your funders and your partners often want to be that engine of impact, and they want to see some societal change at scale. So they might be looking at reduction in public assistance, requirements of public assistance, or increased economic development in a community. So they have a very different why, but it's important that you understand their why, because you need to communicate that to them. And it might not necessarily be your why. And the third is, why do your clients participate? Here is a fun fact. We cannot change the lives of people we do not serve. And I have worked with tons of groups in the past who aren't getting the outcomes that they want because they're not understanding their participants' whys. A great example that I talk about all the time is that one of these, I was working on a collective impact initiative, and the community wanted to improve a geography's health. And so they realized that it was a health desert, that in this particular neighborhood, they did not have access to high quality healthcare. So everyone was going and using emergency rooms, which obviously is very costly, not necessarily the quality of care they needed, required a lot of, if you have to go to the hospital for the ER for something that doesn't need to be at the ER, you often are spending a lot more time there. You're calling off work, right? It was just a very bad problem. So they decided as a community, they wanted to invest in a beautiful brand new health facility, a federally qualified health facility, where their neighbors and residents would have access to high quality care, just like higher resource neighborhoods had. And after looking at their outcomes and doing their data, they weren't getting the results they want because their participants and clients did not believe that the health center was for them. There was a cultural responsiveness problem within the community. And so we can't change the health of the people in our community, even if we build a great center, if they don't show up. So we need to understand why they participate as well. So here is how just doing the 5 whys can totally transform a purpose-driven mission statement. So here's an example of a senior service agency that prior to doing their 5 whys, they had some very boring mission statement. I don't know, it was so boring I can't tell you what it was, but so it's a little bit of a joke. It really didn't have that blah blah blah, but essentially it was, hey, we're a public agency and we do this through this to improve this for Ohio's this, right? It didn't inspire anyone. It was long, it was lengthy, it didn't help us drive our strategic plan. But after this, the purpose-driven mission statement was very clear. that we are going to promote choice, independence, and quality of life for all aging Ohioans. Look at how simple that was. Is that okay? When they went through their whys, what they learned was that they served all Ohio, like everyone is aging, and they had a variety of programs. Some of them started at 18 because if you had a disability, they might serve you and you might be in a nursing home, but 18 for a variety of reasons. So aging, they defined as anyone who's getting older and may have a chronic or acute issue. But what they knew about this population and what their whys were was that they wanted choice. They wanted to be able to live and age wherever it made sense for them. Also, seniors want independence, but so did our funders. Our funders wanted independence because independence meant that you were likely healthier and you weren't in expensive nursing homes. You are in your own home and thriving and contributing to the economy. Same thing with quality of life. We all want quality of life. So not only was that important to our participants wise, it was important to our missions wise, but it was also important to our funders wise, because if you have a high quality of life, there's less likelihood that you're using ER visits. There's less likely that you're going back into nursing homes. And so this simple statement, where not only did it help us like clearly communicate why we do what we do and what we were trying to accomplish, but when we started to align our activities, all of our activities had to be related to choice, independence, quality of life. All of our activities had to be, all of our measures had to be aligned with choice, independence, quality of life. So see how it makes it really simple to start to build that impact roadmap. So once you go through your 5 whys exercise, you develop that very, very clear purpose, mission-driven statement. Now we're going to need to identify our strategic priorities and our vehicles for change. And I love this analogy, and thank you, Laurel, for creating this beautiful graphic for me. Is that when we are developing our strategic plan, we will have our current state. Where do we want, we'll have our future state. Where do we want to go? We've got that impact roadmap. We have that purpose-driven mission statement, and we should have some targets. Like we want to, the example that I just shared, they had a very big vision that they wanted to make sure that the amount of people receiving home and community-based care was 80%, and only 20% were receiving nursing home level care. And it was actually flipped at the time. So that was a big goal, that they wanted to flip the ratio of people who are receiving long-term quality care in their own homes versus in nursing homes. That's a pretty big goal. So they had a clear vision of what they wanted with clear metrics related to their outcomes, but then they knew their current state. They knew that it, like I said, it was flipped. So think about your future state. What is that big, hairy, audacious goal? Can you put metrics around it? One of our clients, Lori Lay Bellhumor in Western Youth Services, she's got a very big goal. Right now, 1 in 5 young people have diagnosed mental health issues. Her big goal is to get that to 1 in 10 in this generation, right? Very, very big goal. She knows what her organization's metrics are in the current state. So you'll have, so think if there's a bridge. There's a bridge between your current state and your future state. The next thing we need to think about are, what are those strategic priorities, those lanes? I like to think of our strategic focus areas are the lanes across the bridge, and our vehicles are our vehicles are going to be our activities. So you can think of your lanes. If you're using Sure Impact or you're a Sure Impact user, you can think of your lanes as your programs, and you can think of your vehicles as your services, your outputs. What do you do to achieve those outcomes? So you might have a bicycle, you might have a bus, you might have a semi truck, you might have a car, you might have a truck, right? So you've got different ways to achieve this goal, but we need to make sure that we identify those priorities, those programs, and then our cars or our trucks, our activities that we do to get there. So we need to make sure, and so many times organizations haven't thought through their theory of change or thought through their logic. but we want to make sure we have effective program model that if you're explaining this to a funder, they can clearly understand, okay, that's your mission-driven purpose statement, and I see how your programs and your activities align to those outcomes that you say that you're achieving. So think about your own roadmap. Can you clearly articulate, okay, that's where we're going, this is where we are, and here are our programs, and here are our services, and these services will and do contribute to that purpose-driven mission statement. And we need to collect the right data to prove that we have an effective model. So we want to make sure that we have data related to our outputs, because our outputs are really counts of our activities under those programs. We want to make sure we have those quality metrics, because those quality metrics are often what the person that you're serving wants. Is they want culturally responsive programming. They want programming that is during a time that's convenient for them. They want to feel respected. They want to feel valued. They want to be receiving the services that they actually need that solve their problem, right? So we need quality data to make sure that we are doing the right activities and services, because we could be putting a lot of vehicles across that bridge and not getting the results we want. And that was one of the very first programs I ever evaluated, was at the juvenile courts, where we learned that we were court-ordering kids onto a vehicle. So think about, we were putting them all on a bus, sending them across the bridge, and we were actually learning that we were getting higher rates of recidivism than if a judge just said, go home, don't do this again. So we knew, we would not have known unless we evaluated our impact that was happening. So we need to make sure we have the data to prove that we have effective program model, not just a theory, but have the real data that links what we do with how well we do it to how people are better off. All right, so every activity on your roadmap should support a outcome that you're looking for. There should be, and please don't get me wrong, I know this isn't a logic model training. I don't believe that there needs to be a line from we do this to get to this short-term outcome to get to this long-term outcome, because in reality, that's not how humans work. There's leapfrogs, there's combinations of things that impact things, but you should at least in theory say, our goal is to have people be financially empowered. If that is our goal, we want them to have greater savings, have income stability, and housing self-sufficiency. If that's your ultimate goal, then the activities that you're doing should clearly align with, if we do this, our theory is it'll help them increase their savings, which will help them dip into emergency situations less, and they'll be more secure. So make sure that you understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, how it links to that outcome. And then this is really important too, because we're all time strapped and we're all resource strapped. So it is very, very important that we take a serious look at all of the activities that we're doing and say, are they the right activities? Are they achieving our desired outcome? And I know it's hard to cut programs. I know it's hard to eliminate things, but we really need to ask ourselves, is it working? And if it's not working, we need to be the leaders to say, we're going to change. We're going to try something different. We're going to hear from our stakeholders and our constituents and meet them where they are and change our programming. And maybe we need to change the vehicle. Maybe, people don't like buses anymore. They want to take cars. So we have to ask ourselves, are we going to change the vehicle in which we're using? And hopefully you understand that as an analogy, not really talking about cars. So we want to make sure that we get really clear. Then, this is how we're flipping the way we think about strategic planning, flipping the way we build our strategy and our plans. Because in the past, what I've seen is the boards are focused on resources and fundraising and marketing and communication, but to what end? Why are you doing all of that work? How is it going to drive this forward? But when we start with, this is our purpose, these are our programs to achieve that purpose, these is our services we provided to achieve those outcomes, and then we start to ask ourselves, what are the resources it takes? So if we want to do that, how much money do we have to raise to get there? How many staff do we need to get there? what kind of communication or advocacy or marketing do we have to do to get there? Do you see how this is different? I know it seems really subtle, but it's much different than what we typically see in this sector. Then we need to have clear accountability. So if we're saying this is what we want to achieve, this is how we're going to do it. Here are the you know, these are our outcomes that we're managing to. Measure them, look at them, identify them, decide if they're working or not, and make changes. And when you do this, you have a very, very, very strong case for funding. It's your case for support writes itself. Your grant applications write themselves. You're not struggling. You don't actually, if you have a very clear roadmap like this, you probably don't even need to hire a fancy marketing firm, because you have exactly what you need to tell that story, to tell that case for support, to show that you are a trustworthy, high-performing organization. All right, so we've created our purpose-driven mission statement. We have been very, very clear on these are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. This is how we're going to do it. Here is the activities we do. Now we need to make sure that we're measuring the right things. In the past, I've worked with organizations who were so hung up on process outcomes that they were totally missing what was important. They were looking at overtime costs. They were looking at how much grant funding they raised, and that's what they were managing too. That's all the board talked about. That's all the staff talked about. It was all around finances. And I'm not saying finances aren't important. They very much are. But you are a nonprofit. You exist to change lives and change circumstances. The money you raise, the dollars you spend should support that mission, not raising money for raising sake. How are you using those dollars to move your mission forward? And if you only focus on money and expenses, you can end up basically wasting all those resources because you don't have effective and efficient programs that are changing lives. So we need to make sure we're measuring the right things and managing to that. And we're managing to our impact, which essentially, what is the definition of impact? Is who is better off, and how do you know that? How can you prove that your programs are better off? So we need, I sound like a broken record because we need these 3 types of data. First, we need to understand, what did we do? So I'm not saying don't measure your outputs. We're going to measure our outputs. That's going to be our number of activities, because when we do this right, and this is where I love our high-performing clients that are using Share Impact, because they have real-time data related to the relationship between what they do and how people are better off, so they can tweak their program design. If you don't collect this data and you don't collect it in the right way and analyze it in the right way, you can't understand the relationship between what you do, how well you do it, and how people are better off. So it is very, very important that we collect these 3 pieces of data. You know how to answer these 3 pieces of data, and that they are linked together. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. But this is what we need to tell a powerful impact story and to make sure we're on track with our impact roadmap. I talked about this as well. This is just another variation of the same concept, but we need to make sure we know who we're serving, because again, even that aging example where it was all aging seniors and they could have been 18 all the way up to 115, the importance was that we understood their age, we understood their zip code, we understood their race, we understood their gender, because it allowed us to then look at our different populations to make sure that this was a statewide agency, that people in the rural communities had the same outcomes as people in the urban communities, or making sure that we weren't leaving certain demographic populations behind and we're having unequal outcomes for different populations or genders. So we want to make sure we do collect some information about who we serve, but we do it not because we shouldn't do it for vanity metrics. We should do it because we care about equal outcomes, and we care about making sure that all people are getting the results that we want them to. And if we find that there's a pocket of our population who's not, we can dig in deeper and understand maybe what they might need a different vehicle. They may need a different program, but making sure that we don't change our outcomes, we change how we serve them to get to the same outcomes. We also want to make sure we understand our activities. And what we do, because we can learn, sometimes we can learn, we can scale back our programming. I've had examples of where our clients have learned that if they use a certain vehicle, if they used a certain program, that they could basically get a young person from having signs of symptomology to fully functioning with 4 hours of service, versus another type of treatment, it was taking 40 hours of service. Well, I don't know about you, but if I have limited resources and I can get someone to fully functioning in 4 hours versus 40 hours, I'm going to train my staff, and this is what this organization did. They trained their staff in this new methodology. They invested the resources to put their focus there, because then they could save money, they could save more, they could serve more people and get people healthier faster. So that's why we need to understand the relationship. And of course, we need to know our outcomes, which is how people are better off. Now, obviously, we don't want to, we can't boil the ocean. We can't measure everything, because too much data will cause us to have analysis paralysis. But what we can do is select the right measures. And how are we going to select the right measures? Is we're going to go back to those whys. I told you that why the 5 whys was going to come up all the time. So we want to think about, what were our whys, what were my participants' whys, and what were my funders' whys, and make sure that when you think about the impact measures you're using, you have some of your whys, you have some of your participants' whys, and you have some of your funders' whys. So you're managing to the things that matter most to you. So that's why we are going to bring this back. Now, we will send out these slides, but this will likely be the biggest gift I give to you in this webinar today. And that is, there really are only, I have 12 on this slide, but I like to say there's really only 11, because I don't necessarily agree that the reduction in administrative costs should be an outcome measure, but we do know some people are going to ask for that. They're going to ask for your overhead costs. So I have it in here, but it's not my favorite, but I have it in here because some people are going to care. So it might be something you want to be able to measure and communicate. But when we think about the 12 outcome measures, this is your framework. If you're thinking about your whys, and I don't know if I clearly articulated that, but your whys become your outcomes. Your whys become what you measure. And when we think about this range of what you can measure, you can ask yourself, does our mission increase knowledge and awareness? If so, how? And is that one of our whys? Does our organization help change attitudes? If so, how? How would we measure that? You can kind of go through each of these 12 outcomes and say, does our organization increase our customers' readiness for something? If so, how? And I'm not saying you're going to measure all 12 of them. You're not. You're probably going to only measure like 5. But if 5, maybe 3, if you're really clear theory of change. But you want to just go through each of these 12 and say, does our organization do this? If so, how? What why shows that we reduce undesirable behavior? Or what why shows our goal is to increase social status, right? So this will help us then make it even more actionable, more measurable, and more clear. So this is a great framework to kind of ask yourself, what are your whys? Do we do this? And if so, how would we measure it? All right, so I've kind of outlined everything, all the teaching and learning that I want to share with you today, but I want to show you a case study and how, when you implement this in your everyday practice, when you create these cultures, you create that impact roadmap, who knows where you'll go as an organization. So I'm going to highlight our friends, Family Flourish. They do use Share Impact to capture all of their data. So they have real-time insights into who they're serving, what they're doing with them, and how people are better off. But they didn't start on day one using Share Impact. But their executive leader and founder, Amy Clavin, started with a vision and a mission. She had come from the affordable housing world and had this vision for a new nonprofit. And what she wanted to do was, for people who wanted to, she wanted to create a program where families could move to higher resource communities, because in the higher resource communities, she had noticed through the data that she was working with that children had better educational outcomes, and that it was an opportunity to kind of break that 2-generation poverty stigma. but she knew this had to be data driven. She knew it had to be, proven. So she engaged Ohio State University early on in her work to help her really identify the need and the research that showed that there was a clear theory of change here, and what services needed to be done, and how could they, again, back to her programs and her outcomes, and how she was going to deliver her services. So their business model is to, in 3 years, it's a long-term program, they move families who are in under-resourced neighborhoods to higher resource neighborhoods. They provide 3 years of rent subsidy in these market rate apartments. And so the children of these families are going to higher resource schools while they're in the program. But they don't have to worry about, there's some rent. They do pay some portion of the rent because all the families are working. They're just not working wages that could afford these market rate units in these higher resource neighborhoods. And then they also get workshops. They get monthly coaching, more like life coaching, related to increasing their wage, access to education, really thinking about how do higher resource families help their children launch into the world. This program provides all of that to their families in their program. And so they set out to have very strong goals, outcome goals related to, they are serious that after those 3 years, when the rent subsidies go away, they want these families to be able to continue to live in these market rate apartments, paying full market rate. If they choose to, they can move. But I mean, if that's where they want to live, that they can continue that lease on their own, with their own resources. And so they started to collect, okay, are we increasing the wages of our participants? And the data they have is that 58% of their graduates their graduates raised their incomes by 58%. People, that is amazing, right? That is getting someone to self-sufficiency. And on average, it was $17,000. I've kind of rattled on about Amy's story, but they are so data driven that they have real-time insights into how are their families engaging in coaching? How are they increasing their savings? How are they increasing their income? What do the families say about their programs? And they've been able to use this data, tell their story, that not only are they thriving as a nonprofit, they've started with a cohort of 10, now they're in a cohort of 100, and now they're moving to other cities. They're bringing this model to other cities who want to do this as well. And like I mentioned, that they were able to take this data, leverage it, and get a line item in the state budget. And I'm excited that we have 3 customers this year who were able to use the data that they had at their fingertips. We might have more than 3. It's just 3 that I know of, who were able to get line items in the state budget to fund their work. No strings attached. It's not a grant. It's not a contract. It's literally, this organization will get this money to do their work. That's it. So this is what the power of data can be. So hopefully I've inspired you to think about your impact roadmap, your strategic plan, and is it really focused on how you're going to change lives and change circumstances, and kind of flip it on its head. I'm not saying you're not going to talk about marketing or advocacy or communication or fundraising, but you're going to do it in the lens of how will this help us get to this outcome. So how are we going to create this data-driven culture? Well, first and foremost, we've got to stop thinking that data collection, evaluation, metrics is a nice to have or a luxury or something that data person does. We have to stop thinking about it as an external accountability tool that a funder is imposing on us. No, it is our vehicle for success. Think back to that very first slide. 62% of the organizations that were doing this have increased revenues over the last 2 years versus 18 and 12 people. Don't be only the 18, don't try to be that 18% who somehow efforts their way into increased revenues, when if you implement this, it's guaranteed. It's not 100% guaranteed, but it is definitely significantly more likely you will increase your revenues even during this funding climate. So let's stop thinking about evaluation as a nice to have or an external accountability tool. We have to collect those 3 types of data, because it's those 3 types of data that will help us drive. Are we hitting our output goals? Are we serving the right people? And are we getting the right outcomes for the right people that will help us tell our story? We also need to use it in a positive, continuous improvement learning way. If we implement these cultures and then take a gotcha attitude or a punitive attitude with our staff, then weird things happen. What I love about Sure Impact is it gives people real-time access into their outcomes, real-time visibility into their outputs and what they're doing. But we also know that it's a culture change. And if leadership doesn't help shepherd that culture change, the resistance you may experience, or maybe some of you are Sure Impact customers and you are experiencing that resistance, it's likely because and they're not telling you this, but they're fearful. They're fearful that this visibility, this new accountability, this new kind of like real-time insights, that their leadership might think badly of them, and there might be some shame there. So we want to make sure that we're using it positively as a, hey, let's work together in continuous improvement and learning. And lastly, we need to use our results to educate and bond. And that's why when like I said, I was doing this consulting business for 20 years and realized that it was the technology that was holding the nonprofits back, and wanted to bring the technology into the world that I wanted to see into the world. And one of the biggest barriers was nonprofit employees come work for you because they want to change lives and want to change circumstances, but they were never getting feedback on how they were doing it. So that's why we analyze the data using technology, and our customers have access to real-time information at their fingertips because of their what we built essentially. And so you need to ask yourself, as you're developing this culture, what tool will you use to manage your impact? Of course, we have a bias. We believe that Sure Impact helps develop those, or fits really nicely into an impact roadmap framework where you can have everything you need, those 3 types of data in one place, analyzed in real time with interactive dashboards. But if it's not for you, fine. But what you have to figure out how you're going to collect that data and the amount of time it's going to take you to collect it and analyze it. So when you're thinking about the cost benefit of living in Excel spreadsheets or Google Forms versus upgrading to an affordable client management and impact analysis platform, really think about what is best for your organization. And so once you have the data collected, we now need to communicate it. We need to inspire our funders to want to give to us. So make sure you have these real-time impact statements. And so here's some examples of, Sure Impact customers who are able to have real-time impact statements. In any given time, a housing provider might be able to say that 90% of their residents feel the program improved their health, outlook on life, and ability to remain independent. Or 80% of program residents feel a sense of community in their neighborhoods. Maybe a family service provider can talk about how their programming has increased attendance rates in school, or student achievement and improvement in grade levels, right? So you want to make sure you can succinctly communicate your program's impact at any given time with an impact statement, with those outcome statements. So in conclusion, before I go to a Q&A, I want to share with you our checklist. So I inspire you to take this back to your team and really think about, as you're moving into 2026, what on these 6 checklists do you need to focus on? So first, do you have a clearly defined mission statement that speaks to your whys? That clearly, if I were to read your mission statement, I could say, oh, I know exactly why you do what you do. I know what you're trying to accomplish in the community, whose lives you're trying to change, and how you're trying to change them. Is there a really clear link between the services you provide and those outcomes you produce, or those whys essentially that you produce? Does it make sense that there's a clear theory of change there? And could your staff tell you? Could they say, I do this work every day because our mission is this, and this is how my work contributes to that mission. And I can log into my data platform and I know immediately that I contributed to that mission, and this is how. So make sure you understand how your work is contributing to those positive changes in the community. And the more visibility you can give the person that's on the ground working with the resident or a community member, that insight, the stronger your culture will be. So what are the milestones you can measure and control to get there? Are you living and breathing and using the data you're collecting on a day-to-day basis? Again, it's the use of the data, not just having the data, that's going to drive those changes. So if you need to be using data on the regular every day, giving people feedback about how what they're doing is changing lives and changing circumstances, you probably need to change your systems. You probably need an effective and efficient system to help you collect and analyze those metrics and milestones. And then lastly, what do you want your impact report to show at the end of 2026? Make sure you know that now. Make sure you know in 2026, this time next year, when you're writing your, Thanksgiving appeals, that you know, or Giving Tuesday appeals, that you know what outcomes you want to be celebrating, how you want to talk about the services and your cost per success and your social return on investment. Start today thinking about what you want to show at the end of 2026 and work your way backwards through steps 1 through 5. And I promise you, if you implement this, you will be an industry leader, just like our friends at Families Flourish by the end of this year. Now, I want to, I know I've shared a lot with you. There's a lot to consider. We do offer a free guide to impact measurement. It really condenses everything I wrote about in a 280-page book into a really quick, concise read with step-by-step things you can implement. So please feel free to, take a picture of this QR code, download that, or we'll also send how to get this in our follow-up materials as well. And we may have a few minutes. We got about 5 minutes if there are any Q&A questions for us. But while you're thinking about your questions, I also want to encourage you to do 2 things at the end of this call. The first is, if you know that we've got to get things, we need a system, we've got to get things more rocking and rolling, and you want to spend 20 minutes with me, I can kind of help you on that 6-point checklist and identify where your gaps are and where you may want to focus to be ready for 2026 and beyond. We'll send out a link where you can book a complimentary readiness assessment with me, and we'll walk through kind of where your organization is and where you may want to focus to get yourself there. And we also have an upcoming webinar, November 16th, in just a few weeks, where we'll be talking more about funders and what your funders want to see and how to get ready to take your data and communicate it to funders. So those are the 2 things that we want to talk about, or I invite you to attend. And let's see, do we have any questions, Laurel? I haven't really been monitoring the chat here.
Yes, we do have a couple.
Okay.
And thank you for the presentation. That was great. So the first question was actually about how to talk to funders about your impact and about your impact roadmap. And so I'm going to defer and tell everyone you should just come to our next webinar so Sheri has more time to go into that.
Thank you, Laurel. Yeah, that is definitely where I'm going to go much more into the next week's webinar, because one thing that we found is that, of course, especially this time of year, we're at the end of the year appeal campaign time, and marketing and communication individuals are calling us and saying, hey, how should we talk about our impact? And I'll frankly, during that readiness assessment, I'll say, well, what data do you have? I don't have any data, or here's a pile of surveys that we've collected over the past few years. It's like, you need to start with your culture. You need to start with your system. You need to start with your roadmap. Then communicating your outcomes and packaging that data to go tell a funder a great story and help you raise more money, it's a no-brainer. And so we'll talk about, once you have the data, how you can use it to really drive fundraising success in your organization. But if we don't start with the intentional impact roadmap and data collection and data analysis, we're never going to get to that strong fundraising appeal and that strong case for support. So stay tuned. Come to our November 16th webinar.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just one other quickly. So we had a question about how to get staff educated about the impact roadmap. You talked about educating and bonding with staff over impact. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so what I really mean by that is that what we want to do is we want to make sure we're using first we want to make sure we're communicating our roadmap to as many nonprofits as possible, to as many of our staff as possible. But we also want to use the results, right? So each individual person understands how their work is impacting the organization's impact roadmap. So they can directly see their contribution and the results that they individually are making to the total organization success. And to get there, and again, that's why we develop Sure Impact, is because that does take a lot of effort and work. It does take real-time data collection and analysis, and to have that visibility, and using that data to bond it. That's what I was saying. Use that data to bond and educate your staff and stakeholders on the impact the organization is having, so they continue to be excited and drive more change. So I know we're at the top of the hour. This has been wonderful. Thank you, everyone who has been engaged and participated. I hope that we connect. I hope that you do book your strategy session with me, and we can dive into where your organization might want to focus in the coming year. But thank you so much for your time. Until next time, keep measuring and achieving excellence. Thank you.